Hello there, and welcome back. Settle in, get comfortable, and let the day loosen its grip. Tonight, we're drifting into a story that has been quietly rewriting the way astronomers think about the night sky. A story that begins with a belief so old and so familiar that most of us never question it at all. You are about to fall asleep in a world that still believes comets are chunks of ice, that they tumble through space like forgotten snowballs, melting a little more each time they swing past a star. But tonight, something strange pulls at the edge of that belief. A leak, a misstep, a whisper from inside the system, and it changes everything. For months, astronomers tracked 3I Atlas with quiet curiosity. An interstellar object, they said. Interesting, but not threatening. Yet behind closed doors, something very different was unfolding. Leaked internal memos, sudden data redactions, and now, a new pattern of movement that has no precedent in celestial mechanics. This is not a regular comet. Its surface is strangely reflective, not just icy, but structured. Its emissions don't match standard sublimation, but instead follow a precise timing sequence. And the chemical ratios, they resemble fuel mixtures, not frozen leftovers from star formation. Someone, or something, sent this object, and now it's acting like it knows we're watching. The leak didn't come from an amateur. It came from a source with clearance, someone who saw the raw telemetry before it was filtered for public release, someone who noticed the correction burns, the coordinated changes in spin, the moment Atlas broke from ballistic drift and began guided motion. The language was buried in layers of technical caution, but the message was clear. 3I Atlas is not behaving like a comet because it isn't one. It's something else, something that may have waited millennia to enter our system at this precise angle, at this exact time. It is watching Mars, it is aligning with Earth, and now it is transmitting or responding. If you've ever looked up at the stars and felt like something out there might be waiting, this may be the moment that feeling becomes fact. We're not dealing with a cosmic visitor anymore. We're looking at a mechanism, a signal, a presence. You first notice it in the silence, the way scientists begin pausing mid-sentence when asked about 3I Atlas, the way the live feeds start buffering at key orbital crossings, the way telescopes that once streamed raw observational data now deliver pre-processed charts instead of light. Something subtle has shifted, and the leak begins not with a revelation, but with a hesitation to speak truthfully, as if the truth itself is too large to contain within normal language. It comes from someone buried inside the framework, not a whistleblower, exactly, but an engineer. The kind of person who monitors spectroscopic outputs from deep space observatories for baseline deviations. The kind of person who isn't supposed to notice patterns, but just verify calibration. Yet she noticed something she wasn't meant to. The first anomaly was the rotation, or rather, the correction of it. Natural interstellar objects tumble chaotically, slowly, gradually precessing. 3I Atlas, however, corrected its role. 3 separate data points, days apart, showed deliberate stabilization of its spin axis, not drift, not chaos, control. Then there was the pattern of outgassing. Most comets warm up and begin to vent volatile compounds in response to solar radiation. But Atlas did something different. It initiated emissions while still beyond 4 astronomical units. Too cold, too dark, too far for sublimation. And yet, carbon dioxide burst from its surface in perfect intervals, like a machine pulsing to wakefulness. 8 seconds on, 8 seconds off, then silence, then a triple pulse that matched the Fibonacci sequence. What do you call something that emits mathematical patterns into space? You don't call it a comet. The leak made its way into encrypted astronomy forums first. A screenshot here, a blurred graph there. Then someone shared a private Slack message from an observatory technician in Chile. We're under directive to reroute our primary scopes away from Atlas. Orders came from international coordination level. That never happens for comets. You can imagine what that kind of message does to the minds who live in the margins, the amateur skywatchers, the midnight math geniuses, the pattern seekers who have waited their whole lives for something exactly like this. It galvanized them. And when they pointed their own telescopes toward the coordinates others were told to avoid, what they saw broke the illusion. At first glance, it still looks like a comet, a faint smear across the black, but track it for one full rotation, and things begin to fall apart. Its brightness does not fade consistently. It pulses exactly every 38 minutes. A brightness increase, a spectral spike, then calm, repeat, as if it's powering something internally, or broadcasting, and then the directionality. 3i Atlas does not simply reflect light, it redirects it. Several independent observations recorded a brief specular flare, not a reflection of the sun, but a reflection aimed at Earth. A momentary blinding spike that suggests a surface that moves, mirrors, or focuses incoming light. To do this from an interstellar object that should be frozen and inert is impossible, and yet it happened. Inside NASA, the language changed. In internal memos, Atlas was no longer referred to as an object or a comet. It was the body or the structure. Subtle, bureaucratic language shifts, the kind that precede formal reclassification, but are never intended for public release. Those who noticed began to ask, if it's a structure, then who built it, and for what? More than that, the orbit is engineered. Unlike Oumuamua, which arced sharply out of our system, 3i Atlas is threading a path that intersects multiple planetary gravitational wells, a maneuver that would require prediction of planetary positions centuries in advance, and the trajectory's smoothness, even after accounting for solar wind and perturbations, suggests pre-programmed adjustments rather than random interstellar momentum. This is where it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like design. There's a term used in aerospace navigation, gravity assist choreography. It describes the art of timing spacecraft to slingshot around planets with exacting precision. Voyager, Cassini, Galileo, all require detailed planning to execute it. 3i Atlas appears to be doing this, but from outside the solar system, as if it knew the positions of Venus, Mars, and Earth long before it ever arrived. Let that settle in your chest like weight. The leak culminated with a coded file, a full spectrographic breakdown of Atlas's outgassing signatures, time-stamped and unedited. Inside were chemical markers, inconsistent with any known cometry model. The carbon dioxide ratios were matched by traces of chlorinated hydrocarbons, and something else, faint but real, deuterated methane. That's not something you expect in comets. It's something you see in fuel mixtures, specifically nuclear propulsion fuel. The implications of this cannot be overstated. Either this is a comet that somehow acquired engineered fuel signatures, or it is not a comet at all. You feel it now, don't you? That slow crawling suspicion, that sense that the stars are not just far, they're active, deliberate, and perhaps watching. But the true awakening lies in what happened next. The telemetry stopped. Public updates ceased. NASA moved the Atlas tracking feed behind an authentication firewall. ESA denied new observations. And the Deep Space Network began rerouting communications logs under project codes that didn't exist 2 months ago. That is not the response to a comet. That is the response to contact, or worse, reactivation. The leak was not an accident. It was a warning, and it's just the beginning. You were told that objects like this couldn't change course, that once flung from their native systems, they coasted endlessly mute debris from long-forgotten cosmic events. But 3I Atlas didn't just drift. It executed a maneuver. Not a dramatic swerve or a sudden jet, no Hollywood moment. Just a subtle, almost imperceptible correction, tucked into a long curve near the outer rim of Mars's orbit. Observers at the Mauna Kea observatories saw the numbers before they were quietly removed from the public database. A delta V of only 41 centimeters per second, insignificant for a spacecraft, impossible for a comet. Comets don't adjust, they don't steer, but this one did. And it did so at a point in space where no thermal source could explain sublimation, no solar flare, no passing current, nothing that could ignite volatile compounds naturally. So we are left with a single uncomfortable conclusion. 3I Atlas has internal propulsion. This idea was floated briefly in an internal report circulated among NASA propulsion analysts. Someone at JPL ran simulations using low-thrust ion propulsion models. The results? The maneuver could be replicated, but only if the object had been designed with mass optimization, energy buffering, and course correction in mind. That is, it was built to fly and built to steer. Still, the world slept on. The headlines stayed focused on nearer events, the next Artemis launch, solar flare watches, climate data, and 3I Atlas slipped closer, unnoticed by most, yet pivoting like something with purpose. Then came the second silence. A planned observation run from the James Webb Space Telescope was cancelled. The telescope had already been aimed. Its time slot had already been granted, but the coordinates were replaced with a placeholder. And the reason given? Thermal calibration anomaly. But off record, a technician described something chilling. When the Webb instruments locked onto Atlas, they recorded an emission not just of light, but of structured energy. A spike in the terahertz range, consistent with directed beam output. It was as if the object sent a pulse directly toward the telescope. Not random, not scattered aimed. What happens when a piece of hardware in deep space is observed and the object being observed reacts? That's not passive, that's responsive. Here's where it gets stranger. Amateur radio astronomers began to pick up a repeating background oscillation near 1.46 gigahertz. Faint, buried in noise, but regular. It pulsed with precision, a 10-second burst, then silence, repeating. The pattern aligned, eerily, with the timing of 3I Atlas's periapsis pass near the Martian orbital corridor. Multiple groups triangulated it, The source was not Earth, and it wasn't solar. It was outbound from Atlas. Signals, emissions, silent course corrections. The list grows. Someone or something wanted us to notice, but only in fragments, only in the quiet. That's when Project Revel was activated. You won't find that name in public files. It appears only in internal security correspondence from the Space Force, embedded in redirect protocols for the Deep Space Network. The project's stated goal: real-time anomaly filtering and vector shielding during inbound trajectory assessments. EYES, translated, information lockdown. Anything that shows 3i Atlas behaving outside expected cometry norms gets scrubbed before public systems update. And still, the object moves closer, still pulsing, still quiet, still aimed. There is something uncanny about how perfectly it toes the line between artifact and natural object. It radiates heat, but just enough to avoid suspicion. Its spectrum is dusty, like any carbonaceous body, but under certain angles, spectral lines split, indicating internal differentiation, something metallic. It would be easy to call it a ship, but that word carries assumptions, cockpits, beings, intentional travel. What if that's not what this is? What if we're looking at a machine, yes, but not one designed for passengers? What if it's cargo or infrastructure? One astrophysicist's name, redacted from the leak, wrote in her field notes, "This might not be a vessel for life. It might be life itself. Not biology, not flesh, but function, directive, purpose encoded into orbit and output." You dream of stars as destinations, but maybe 3i Atlas dreams of them as nodes. Maybe it's been waiting, watching, counting orbits and spins, until the conditions align, until the signal begins. Because here's the truth that leaks out of the silence like steam from a pressure vent. Everything about this object screams intention. Its path, its emissions, its timing. None of it fits the coma and tail fairy tale we were raised on. And yet, here we are, rewriting spaceflight history, while the media smiles and shrugs. When you realize that, it hits like a cold wave. This is what the awakening feels like. Not fear, not panic, but the slow dissolve of denial. The moment you admit that the sky has been lying by omission. But the real terror is not that 3i Atlas is artificial. It's that it's familiar, not in design, not in materials, but in behavior. The periodic pulses, the Fibonacci modulations, the prime number sequences buried in its outgassing timing. These are not just universal patterns. These are the kinds of things our own AI systems are trained to look for. And that opens a door your mind may not be ready to walk through. Because if we can recognize the pattern, perhaps the pattern was designed to be recognized. As if someone or something out there wants us to notice, wants us to decode it, wants us to wake up. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe we're just now beginning to perceive what has always been obvious, that we are not observers of the cosmos, we are the observed, and 3i Atlas is merely the next node in a long, quiet system coming online. Imagine building something so vast, so subtle, that the only way anyone could find it is by becoming the kind of species that knows how to look. Now imagine that you're not discovering it by accident, you're finding it exactly when you're meant to. That's the creeping suspicion behind 3i Atlas. Not that it's visiting, but that it's waiting. You weren't meant to notice it a century ago. not during the Voyager age, not even during the Hubble era, but now in a world of infrared telescopes, AI-assisted observatories, distributed amateur networks, and the rise of public astrophysics. Now is the moment when it becomes visible, and not just visible, recognizable, because for all its cosmic mystery, 3I Atlas is conspicuous, almost too conspicuous. Its brightness didn't fade the way normal comets do. As it approached the orbit of Jupiter, the initial curve of its light signature didn't follow the inverse square law precisely. Instead, it shimmered with oscillations, not random flickers, but a pattern of alternating peaks, like breathing. 5 seconds bright, 5 seconds dim, then a longer hold. Repeat. Scientists at the Mount Lemmon survey chalked it up to rotation, a tumbling nucleus, but the rate was too regular, too sharp. It didn't match irregular spinning ice. It matched beacon behavior. Let that word settle for a moment. Beacon, not signal, not flare, but something built to stand out against background noise, built to be found. We usually imagine alien signals as distant and deliberate, radio waves, pulses beamed toward Earth. But what if the best signal is physical? What if the best transmission method is an object, one that moves just wrong enough to trigger curiosity, one that carries within it a payload of questions? This is where 3I Atlas begins to feel less like an accident of space and more like a kind of cosmic USB drive. One designed to drift until a civilization, any civilization, develops the tools to examine it with enough fidelity to realize it isn't natural. You already know about the ecliptic alignment, how its arrival path is nearly flush with the plane of the solar system, within 5 degrees, a statistical rarity. But it goes deeper. Its velocity, its entry angle, and its timing all point to something even more improbable. It entered the system at a speed just slow enough to allow multi-body encounters with Venus, Mars, and Earth. Not just proximity flybys, energy transfer windows. Only one in several million random trajectories would create that sequence. And yet here we are, watching an interstellar body curve through a planetary corridor, as if rehearsing a tour. Even Avi Loeb, cautious in tone, meticulous in analysis, has admitted the numbers are suggestive of engineering. The object's course has a precision that spacecraft planners spend years optimizing, but this wasn't built by us. So the question isn't, is it natural? The question becomes, what is the minimum number of anomalies we're willing to accept before we admit we're not just looking at geology? Because here's the paradox. The more we try to explain each anomaly individually, the more absurd the coincidences become. The alignment? Rare, but maybe it's just luck. The emissions? Odd, but perhaps there's a new class of volatile chemistry we don't understand. The terahertz pulses? Strange, but maybe an imaging artifact. But stack them, one by one, and the probability collapses. Not to zero, but to the place where skepticism becomes a kind of performance, a posture, and that's where the leak becomes indispensable. Because buried in the file dump was a memo, date-stamped, time-stamped, 3 paragraphs long. Given the cumulative behavior of object 3I Atlas, including photometric irregularities, trajectory anomalies, and compositional inconsistencies, it is advised that we reclassify it from natural object to candidate artifact. Further investigation should be handled under secure channels, public narrative, to remain cometry, unless overridden. That phrase, candidate artifact, changes everything. It's not a claim, it's a categorization, a placeholder for things that resemble tools more than rocks. And now, the object is near Mercury's orbit, approaching perihelion, the sunward edge of its path. And you know what happens there. At perihelion, it vanishes behind the sun, hidden from every Earth-based telescope. A perfect blind spot, a perfect opportunity. If it changes course there, we won't see it. If it activates there, we won't know until it's already heading back out or not. You should be wondering, what kind of machine would wait to make its move until the one moment when we cannot watch? What kind of mind designs a journey, not just to be seen, but to be temporarily unseen? This is what you begin to understand in the final phase of awakening, that 3i Atlas is not a message we intercepted, it is a message we decoded. It was always there, it just waited until we built the tools, the sensors, the algorithms, the curiosity. Maybe it's a test, maybe a trap, or maybe, just maybe, it's a gift. Because the closer it gets, the more it teaches us about orbital mechanics, chemistry, and our own limits. It is forcing us to confront the difference between what looks real and what behaves real. And when the two don't match, that's when truth leaks through. So, as you lie in bed, hearing the faint hum of electronics and the sigh of a distant night, consider this. What if we've already made contact? What if contact was never a handshake, but a breadcrumb trail? 3i Atlas is not just drifting toward the Sunday, it is moving through our blind spots, not to avoid us, but to teach us where we're not looking. That's the shape of the leak, a shift in narrative, a tremor in certainty, and the sense, growing louder by the day, that we were meant to see this. You might think the truth hides in shadows, in cloaked chambers or encrypted files, but sometimes it's right in front of you in weight, in inertia, in the simple refusal of something to move the way it should. That's where 3i Atlas becomes undeniable. It is heavier than it should be, and that changes everything. Let's begin with the basics. When comets outgas, they shift. Tiny jets of vapor spew into space, acting like miniature thrusters, nudging the object ever so slightly. We've measured this in every known active comet. It's one of the ways astronomers calculate nucleus size, by comparing observed paths to predicted gravitational arcs and mapping the deviations. But when scientists tracked 3i Atlas, they noticed something wrong. It was outgassing. Spectroscopy from the Webb Space Telescope confirmed that it was shedding material carbon dioxide, hydrogen cyanide, and water vapor, not in massive plumes, but in a steady exhale. And yet, there was no corresponding shift in trajectory. None. It moved like a rock under pure gravitational influence, even though it was venting hundreds of kilograms of gas per second. If that gas were pushing off a normal-sized object, we would see it drift, wobble, change course slightly. That's physics. That's momentum conservation. But 3i Atlas stayed the course, perfectly. So researchers did the math. How massive would something have to be to outgas at that rate and not change velocity? The answer was staggering. 33 billion metric tons. That's the lower bound. That's what it must weigh, at minimum, for its trajectory to remain so pristine. For scale, that's heavier than Mount Everest. It's 5,000 times the mass of Halley's Comet. It is, by a wide margin, the most massive interstellar object ever observed if it's natural. But that's the problem. That mass doesn't fit. Not with its light curve, not with its apparent volume, not with the standard equations we use to model icy bodies. If 3I Atlas really is 5 or 6 kilometers in diameter, and its reflectivity, its albedo is average, then yes, that mass could make sense. But comets are not that dense. They are porous, fluffy. Think dirty snowballs. Their average density is less than half that of water. Yet to explain Atlas's mass without trajectory shift, you need it to be compact, dense, engineered, or something else entirely, hollow. That's where the theory sharpens into something uncomfortable. A structure can appear large and luminous, but contain very little mass if it's mostly empty inside. A geodesic dome, a shell, a casing. You don't need to build a comet-sized starship to fool observers. You just need to mimic one, reflect like one, and carry just enough mass to move like a rock. What if Atlas isn't pretending to be a comet, but pretending to be massive? What if it's optimizing visibility for us, while optimizing maneuverability for itself? The leaked internal modeling from one ESA study suggests a core shell design. A dense internal kernel, possibly metallic, surrounded by a wide, low-mass debris field, held in place electrostatically. That would explain the mass concentration and light scattering. It would also match the strange halo pattern seen in multi-wavelength imagery. Most damningly, it would mean that Atlas is using surrounding debris not as waste, but as camouflage, a cloak of relevance, a way to appear familiar enough to avoid panic, while still being exactly what it was meant to be: alien infrastructure. It's not the first time astronomers have speculated on such things. In 2018, the Oumuamua debates flirted with the idea of a thin, sail-like object. Loeb himself proposed that its extreme aspect ratio and lack of outgassing might indicate an engineered probe. But Oumuamua came and went so fast, we never had time to study it properly. Atlas is different. It's bigger, slower, closer, and most alarmingly, staying longer. That brings us to the next anomaly. The trajectory arc is flattening. It was expected to pass through and out, hyperbolically, like any interstellar visitor. But new calculations suggest a slight deviation. Not enough to call it an orbit yet, but enough to raise eyebrows. If Atlas executes even a mild braking maneuver near perihelion, especially while hidden from Earth behind the Sun, it could shift from escape to capture. It would stay. And if it stays, then everything changes. The 33 billion tons become not an estimate, but a clue. The kind of clue you leave behind when you want to be noticed, but only by the right minds. The minds who track mass and motion, not headlines and hype. Because here's what no agency will say out loud. 3I Atlas appears to obey orbital mechanics with an uncanny finesse. It skirts the limits of randomness. It walks the razor's edge of plausibility, but never breaks the rules. It merely bends them. That's not how rocks behave. That's how design behaves. A structure built to look natural until examined too closely. A mask worn just long enough to pass the first tests. And if it makes its move during perihelion behind the Sun, where we cannot watch, then it's not just outsmarting us. It's following a playbook we didn't know we were part of. NASA's private mass estimates, redacted in public reports, were not meant to leak, but they did. And what they reveal is not just a comet, it's an equation. one that doesn't balance unless you add a new variable: intention. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine this: a hollow vessel the size of a city, weighing more than a mountain, wrapped in its own vapor, threading through the solar system like a needle through time, not asking to be seen, not hiding either, just there, waiting for you to do the math. You expect the truth to arrive wrapped in numbers, polished charts, peer-reviewed certainty. But sometimes it doesn't arrive that way. Sometimes it appears as a silent smudge in the Martian sky and refuses to behave. That's what happened on October 3rd, 2025. While Earth was busy arguing about budgets and blackouts, a lonely piece of metal on another world quietly turned its eyes toward the heavens. The Perseverance rover, which has weathered dust storms, hardware fatigue, and 10,000 quiet sunsets, captured a series of high-altitude frames aimed at the constellation Corona Borealis, and in one of them, something showed up. Faint, blurry, cylindrical. You've heard about anomalies before, blips, ghost pixels, but this was different. The shape held, across frames, across instruments, a vertical shimmer, standing where no object should be. And then came the part that still gives scientists pause. That was the same day NASA furloughed over 15,000 workers. Not before, not after. That day, you don't furlough your planetary observation team on the precise day a once-in-a-civilization object flies within imaging range of Mars. Unless something bigger is happening, unless you need the silence, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which should have released high-res captures from its high-rise instrument, said nothing. Not delayed, not clouded, just nothing. The European Trace Gas Orbiter, offline for maintenance. ESA's Mars Express, under review. All three satellites, perfectly positioned to capture the best look humanity would ever get, at 3i Atlas, and not a single pixel was made public. But in the void of official data, the internet spoke. A small account named UFO Mania posted a processed still, blown out, cropped, pixelated, but chilling. The caption was short. It's cylindrical. That post hit like electricity in water. Within hours, the image was dissected, denoised, run through AI stabilizers, and reverse star mapped, coordinates matched, time matched, sun angle confirmed. And while skeptics screamed artifact, one detail refused to be erased. The object wasn't tumbling, it was steady, suspended, like a lighthouse in orbit, not drifting, not flaring, just watching. An hour later, another account chimed in, one known to you by now, 3i Atlas Anomaly. They posted 10 observations in a single thread, not speculation citation. They pulled polarization readings from the Atacama Array, ultraviolet flux data from Webb, emission delta curves from the Swift Observatory. It was precise, methodical, almost clinical. The detail that mattered most: a measured polarization of negative 2.77% at a phase angle of 7 degrees. That's not comet behavior. That's engineered reflectivity. The kind you get from layered materials. The kind you don't find in naturally formed bodies. Then came the quiet drop of a name, not shouted, just inserted. Stephen Burns, a reclusive physicist, dust plasma expert, former advisor to the European Planetary Protection Office, a man known for declining interviews, but never for making claims, until now. According to an unnamed BBC correspondent, Burns told a private circle, "It's not just a spacecraft, it's aware of Mars, of Earth, of sequence. Sequence, as in a pre-selected chain of planetary encounters. Mars first, Venus second, Earth third, and each flyby lining up with the moment of best opportunity for observation and silence." And here's the twist that made even hardened skeptics pause. The image from the Mars sky, the blurry, boosted one, wasn't entirely alone. An astrophotographer in Namibia named Simeon Schmaus had independently imaged the same region. Stacked frames, deep exposure. When filtered through hydrogen alpha curves, something faint emerged. A linear tail, but not trailing from solar wind like a comet. No, it extended toward the Sunday. You heard that right. Not away, toward. In astrophysics, tails always point from solar pressure, never into it. But this extension was aligned forward, like an antenna, like a probe facing its power source. And in that moment, a terrifying hypothesis was born. What if that's not a tail? What if it's an intake? A collector? A siphon? Something built to ingest radiation, not flee from it. We already know that 3I Atlas is emitting more volatiles than models allow. Its sublimation rate is too high for its thermal state. Its emission spectrum is unbalanced. It is acting not like an object being melted, but like one being powered. And while Earth was debating whether it was natural or not, another decision had already been made. ESA transferred tracking to JUICE, the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, but no data from JUICE has been released. Not to the public, not even to partner nations. As of this moment, all orbital vectors for 3I Atlas are under classified review. They're not trying to study it, they're trying to manage it. And while the world spins, while holidays pass, while people forget, the cylinder continues. Behind the Sunday, hidden in conjunction, no ground-based telescope can see it now. No observatory on Earth will track it until December. It is behind the curtain, perhaps adjusting, perhaps awakening, and the silence is now total. No images, no press, no orbit refinements, but in that silence, you listen, because you remember what Burns said. Sequence, not accident, not coincidence. Sequence, Mars, Venus, Earth. And if that's true, if this thing is aware, if it is tracking opportunity, if it understands orbital windows and media blackouts and solar cover, then we are not observers. We are the observed. You wonder, was this the moment we were meant to notice? Not the discovery in July, not the Mars flyby in October, but the absence, the blackout, the space between facts. Like negative space in a painting, like silence between notes in a song. You realize the shape doesn't need to speak. It already is. And what it says is simple. I am not passing through. I am here to stay. And I know you're watching, because I'm watching you too. The deeper you look into 3I Atlas, the stranger the story becomes. Not just the object itself, but the people surrounding it, the names, the researchers, the specialists who were once openly publishing observations, and then, suddenly, weren't. There's a strange stillness that follows a classified discovery. It ripples out, not in explosions, but in disappearances from public databases, from author lists, from research teams that were, just weeks earlier, eager to share their findings. It began with a simple citation anomaly, a paper submitted to the Astrophysical Journal, letters titled spectral reflectivity and non-ballistic drift behavior in 3I Atlas. It was live for less than 24 hours. Then it vanished. Not retracted, not rejected, withdrawn. The lead author was a propulsion physicist who had previously published papers on ion beam dynamics for near-Earth satellites. Her name, once linked to over a dozen published studies, is now scrubbed from her university page. When contacted for comment, she replied with a single line, "I am no longer authorized to speak on that subject. Please direct inquiries to Mission Liaison." Mission Liaison? What mission? Another co-author, affiliated with the Lunar and Planetary Institute, showed similar silence. His once active research blog went offline the same week the paper disappeared. His last post? A cryptic one-sentence entry. "We thought it was geology. It was geometry." Then there's the curious case of the Italian observatory technician, the one who first posted the corrected spin rate data of Atlas on a public GitHub. Within 72 hours, not only was the repository deleted, but the domain of the observatory itself was redirected to a generic tourism site. The archives are still accessible through cached mirrors, and if you dig, you'll find it a spectral graph showing harmonics in Atlas's light curve that resemble engineered modulation. Each peak spaced not by random fluctuation, but by primes. That's when observers began using a different term for the object. Not comet, not body, not interstellar rock, but artifact. One researcher, a systems engineer who worked on adaptive optics for exoplanet imaging, described it this way during a podcast before the episode was pulled. Imagine a lighthouse that only lights up when you pass a certain technological threshold. That's what this feels like. It's not trying to be seen by anyone. It's trying to be seen by someone specific. The podcast was removed for violating terms of service. No further explanation was given. Within forums of the astronomy community, the pattern was noted and then feared. The professionals were going quiet, not by choice, by pressure. And the leak, ironically, started growing from the edges, not from the institutions, but from the fringes, the amateurs, the rogue academics, the retired engineers with telescope time and no oversight. They started referring to each other as listeners, not watchers, not astronomers, but listeners, because 3I Atlas, whatever it is, isn't just being seen, it's broadcasting. One ham radio operator in Argentina posted a recording on a private forum, a slow, clicking pulse at 1.46 gigahertz. The clicks varied in spacing, but never in frequency. Overlaid spectrograms showed a resemblance to packet headers, as if the pulse were data, not noise. He was later contacted by an anonymous party and advised to cease distribution of unverified signals. His uploads disappeared. Elsewhere, a group of amateur spectroscopists in Sweden published a curious finding: a subtle change in the sodium D-line emissions from Atlas's Comet. The shift couldn't be attributed to solar wind. It resembled Doppler encoding. In other words, not just matter being ejected, but information being carried within it. If that's true, 3I Atlas isn't just a comet-like object. It's a transmission medium, a moving library, a hard drive made of ice and reflection. And maybe that's why the professionals are going dark. Maybe it's not that they were silenced out of fear, but that they were pulled into something bigger, something compartmentalized, something mission classified. Remember the earlier phrasing, candidate artifact. Once an object crosses that threshold, once it stops being explained through geology and starts hinting at geometry, at signal, at engineering, it stops being studied in public. It becomes a national security issue. We saw this during the Galileo spacecraft mission, when unknown emissions from Jupiter's moon Europa were scrubbed from raw feeds. We saw it with the STS-48 shuttle footage. Unexplained maneuvers, quickly dismissed. Now we're seeing it again. And the irony is, the truth isn't being buried in vaults. It's being hidden in plain sight by removing the names, the voices, the researchers who once spoke and now don't. Because you don't have to hide the data if no one credible is left to talk about it. The engineers haven't disappeared physically, but they've gone quietly inert. Their digital fingerprints erased, their affiliations reassigned, their voices gone, except for one. In the most obscure corner of an archived university FTP server, there's a final paper, never published, untitled, just an abstract and a single paragraph of notes. It ends with this: the object's silence is not passive. It is a form of invitation, one that filters by perception. If you can see it, you're meant to. If you can't, you're not part of the intended audience. Who, then, is the audience? You, perhaps. Us. The species just advanced enough to start decoding a celestial breadcrumb trail. Because this isn't just about a comet. It's about the people who knew it wasn't and vanished into its silence. When something enters the solar system from interstellar space, we call it rare. When it does so with a hyperbolic trajectory, we call it unique. But when two such objects arrive in less than a decade, and they both defy the same expectations, we should stop calling it coincidence. We should start calling it a pattern, because 3I Atlas isn't the first. You remember the name Oumuamua, the first interstellar object ever recorded. Long, thin, fast, tumbling strangely. It arrived in 2017, made a sharp turn past the sun, and was gone before most telescopes could even adjust. No coma, no tail, no thermal signature matching known cometary behavior. Just an anomaly and a mystery. For years, scientists debated it. Was it natural? A fragment from an ancient planetary collision? A hydrogen iceberg? Or something else? Avi Loeb famously broke from consensus, suggesting it might be artificial, a light sail, perhaps, a relic of intelligent engineering. He was laughed at. Then, quietly, cited. Now, with 3I Atlas, the laughter has stopped. Because Atlas exhibits the same strange features, a non-random trajectory, light curve anomalies, unexplained emissions, and above all, timing. You see, if Atlas were simply a rogue rock from the stars, its arrival should be statistically disconnected from Oumuamua. But it isn't. Both objects entered on a path inclined just a few degrees off the solar plane. Both exhibited anomalous accelerations without clear outgassing vectors. Both produced reflections inconsistent with their apparent mass. And here's where it gets eerie. When you map their inbound paths and extrapolate backward not to where they came from, but to when they passed through interstellar voids, they were within observational reach of the same star systems, just decades apart. Both traveled from the direction of the Lyra Cygnus region, both likely passed near the Vega system, and both arrived after Earth entered its current solar maximum cycle. It is as if something responded, You're not supposed to think that way. You're trained to assume randomness. But the numbers suggest choreography. And there's an older whisper beneath all this, something hidden in the data archives of 1984. That was the year of the Pioneer anomaly, a subtle, unexplained deceleration of the Pioneer 10 and 11 spacecraft. It was later attributed to heat recoil forces, but buried in early trajectory files were notes from engineers. Anomalous drift, consistent with directed influence from LSR vector, local standard of rest, the velocity frame of stars in the Milky Way. In other words, the frame from which both Oumuamua and Atlas seem to have been launched. Is it possible we've been seeing the signs for decades and just didn't know where to look? There's more. A handwritten journal entry by Carl Sagan, archived in a drawer at Cornell University, dated 1980. It reads, "If contact ever comes, it may not be with messages, but with motion, orbits that speak, patterns as language. What if we've already received that language and only now begun to learn its grammar? Because Atlas doesn't just arrive, it performs. Its alignment with Venus and Earth isn't just convenient, it's optimal. If you were trying to scan these planets from a passing vantage point, the current trajectory would offer ideal observation windows. One astrophysicist referred to it as a planetary flyby of maximum informational density, a tour route. And when you combine that with the timing of Earth's own technological awakening, our shift into a globally connected observation species, the implication becomes clear. It's not that we finally caught a glimpse of something random. It's that the sky has been sending us a visitor every generation, each a little closer, each a little more obvious, each echoing the last. Even ancient myth carries the pattern. In Chinese astronomy, a recurring broom star was recorded every few centuries, always moving against expectation, always vanishing behind the sunday. In Mesoamerican carvings, an object appears repeatedly alongside glyphs for the mirror of the gods, always descending, always returning. You've heard of the Dogon people of Mali, who mapped the invisible companion star of Sirius long before modern instruments confirmed it. Their oral traditions speak of visitors who came from the sky in vessels that spun and sang. We call it folklore, but what if it's memory? What if every few generations, something comes close enough to stir the story again, to leave a mark in the sky and in the mind? Maybe that's what Atlas really is. Not a message, not a probe, but a reminder. A reminder that we are part of a timeline we didn't start, that there are rhythms larger than our lifetimes. That orbit is only one form of return. You begin to realize the past isn't silent. It echoes, it loops, it leaves trails we're only just beginning to follow. And 3I Atlas is the loudest echo yet. Not because it speaks, but because it rhymes with every story, every anomaly, every strange object we weren't ready to believe. But now, we are. You've seen the golden spiral before. It hides in galaxies, in pine cones, in hurricanes. It governs the growth of sunflowers, the curl of shells, the spacing of your very bones. It is the Fibonacci sequence, a quiet code stitched into the blueprint of life. But now, it is being broadcast from the edge of the solar system. 3I Atlas is pulsing, not randomly, not chaotically, but mathematically. The first to notice were a group of university students in Prague, hobbyists in radio astronomy, pointing a decommissioned dish toward the coordinates of the object, just to see if anything came through. What they found didn't sound like a signal at first. It was a rhythm, faint clicks, then longer gaps, then pairs, then triples, a pattern that kept expanding, echoing the series. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. It was the Fibonacci sequence, translated not into numbers, but time intervals, pulses. At first, they assumed a glitch, maybe electrical interference or a repeating feedback loop. But after 24 hours of observation, the pulses remained steady. Others began to listen. Independent teams from Japan, South Africa, and Australia confirmed the same modulation. Each pulse spaced in prime-aligned intervals, each duration matching the golden ratio. This was not thermal noise. This was a structure with internal timing, and that timing evolved. Over the course of a week, the sequence began to rotate. Every 13 cycles, the series reset, but with a phase shift, as if the object was spinning through a sequence space, not just physical space. One researcher called it rotating logic. Another compared it to a Rubik's Cube of time. You don't see this in comets. You don't see this in rocks. You see this in systems, in architecture. And here's the part that gnaws at the edge of the rational mind. Fibonacci sequences are not arbitrary. They're emergent. They appear when systems are trying to optimize for energy, for space, for visibility. They're what nature uses to organize complexity. So, what does it mean when an object from outside our solar system starts broadcasting that pattern directly, not encoded in light curves, not hinted at in spin rates, but broadcast like a beacon? It doesn't stop there. An amateur spectroscopist in India found something hidden deeper in the spectrum, faint harmonics layered beneath the pulses. When transposed into audio frequencies and plotted visually, the waveform revealed a fractal. Yes, a fractal, not noise, not randomness, recursion, shapes folding into themselves, the mathematical equivalent of a mirror held to a mirror. He published the data under the name Signal Phi. The post was removed within 2 days. But mirrors remember, and so do backups. What's strange is not that a signal might contain the Fibonacci sequence. It's that it might begin with it, as if to say, we understand growth. Or perhaps more disturbingly, we understand you. You see, our own attempts to encode intelligent messages for extraterrestrial life have used these same patterns. The Arecibo message, the Voyager Golden Record, we built them to be recognizable, universally mathematical. We assumed that if anyone ever found our signal, they'd need a cipher, something simple, elegant, recursive. Now, imagine someone else beat us to that idea, and instead of sending sound, they sent a shape, a path, an object. 3i Atlas, in this sense, is not just flying through space. It is performing mathematics visibly. It is letting its structure be the signal, a signal we were only ever meant to notice once we could parse the code. That's what echoes from the past really are. Messages, not in words, but in design. And there's precedent. In 1974, when the Arecibo telescope broadcast humanity's first coded radio message into space, it was aimed at the M13 star cluster, 25,000 light-years away. We knew no one would hear it. not for millennia, but that wasn't the point. The point was to mark a threshold, to say, we're here, and we know how to speak the language of the universe now. What if 3i Atlas is that kind of threshold? Not from us, but to us. A message from a civilization that once reached this same level, the radio window, the orbital lens, the moment of reflection. And instead of shouting through the void, they left breadcrumbs, not words, not signals, but objects, designed to behave in ways that cannot be ignored. The Fibonacci pulses, then, are not just about math. They're about mirror recognition, about showing us ourselves in the sky. One astrophysicist, writing under pseudonym after being removed from a university project, said this: "When I saw the pattern, I didn't think alien. I thought test, like someone checking if we'd woken up yet, because the beauty of Fibonacci is that it doesn't demand culture. It doesn't need language. It only needs observation, attention, curiosity, the same qualities that define intelligent life. So what does it mean that we're now listening, that we're responding, not with panic, but with pattern matching? It means the message got through. The pattern has been received. And what comes after the sequence is the answer. It starts with a shadow not cast by the sun, but cast by missing certainty. For all its brilliance and motion, 3i Atlas still refuses to show us what it is. It reveals only hints, glints, patterns, but never a clear picture. And maybe that's the point. Because when you study the way it reflects light, it's as if it was sculpted not to be seen directly, but to be inferred. The shape of 3i Atlas has been one of the most debated mysteries in recent astronomical history. Not because we lack data, but because the data contradicts itself. Photometric analysis from Earth-based telescopes suggests an elongated object, similar in ratio to Oumuamua, possibly 10 times longer than it is wide. But radar pings from deep space antennas, though faint, imply something much more compact, and thermal mapping from the Neowise array gives off a profile that doesn't match either. 3 shapes, 3 interpretations, none of them line up. You begin to suspect the problem isn't with the instruments, it's with the object. There's a strange term used in computational design: adaptive obfuscation. It describes a surface that changes how it appears depending on how it's observed. A shape that always reveals some truth but never the whole truth. It's used in stealth technology, in surveillance drones, in architecture that wants to blend into both sky and sea. Now imagine applying that to an interstellar object. 3i Atlas may be shaped like nothing, or like everything. There are moments when observers catch symmetrical flares, reflections that suggest flat, planar surfaces. Other times, its brightness curve hints at a tumbling spiral. Once, an observer in Chile recorded a brief double peak, as if 2 objects had momentarily aligned, then diverged. Is it one object, or several? Is it a shell wrapped around a core? Is it shedding? Is it growing? These aren't the kinds of questions we ask about comets. These are questions we ask about machines, and history whispers that we've asked them before. In 1973, the Soviet spacecraft Mars 6 reported a brief, anomalous reading just minutes before descending into the Martian atmosphere, a radar echo that did not match the terrain. It was dismissed. The record was buried. But in handwritten notes, one technician wrote, "Object, at 3 degrees off expected path, echo dispersed, shape unclear, reflectivity inconsistent. It means nothing until now, until you realize that 3I Atlas has followed a near-identical inclination, that it now occupies a region of space just weeks away from where Mars 6 lost contact. Coincidence or choreography? Because the farther back you look, the more these coincidences stack. The Black Knight satellite conspiracy, that persistent myth about an artificial object in polar Earth orbit, was built on misread signals and overinterpreted echoes. But part of its allure came from the idea that something has always been watching, not actively, not invasively, just waiting. And isn't that what 3I Atlas is doing now? It doesn't accelerate. It doesn't slow down. It doesn't speak. It behaves. It follows a path not of randomness, but of resonance, slipping through regions of space we've visited, orbiting planets we've touched, broadcasting pulses we recognize. There is shape here, not physical, narrative, mythic, the spiral, the mirror, the seed. And we've seen that shape before, not in space, but in dreams, in stories, in the symbols etched into stone and whispered into bedtime tales. The Hopi people of North America tell of the Patu Vota, the star that returns not to bring destruction, but remembrance, a shape in the sky that reveals itself when the world has forgotten its place. The Maori speak of Te Kore, the space between spaces, a dark vessel that drifts through time, bearing knowledge from before the first dawn. And in the ancient Sanskrit Vedas, there is mention of Vimana crafts that hum and rotate, whose shapes cannot be held in the mind for more than a few moments. You don't have to believe these stories are literal, but they echo the same geometry of mystery, a shape that will not settle, a presence that defies naming. 3I Atlas is not just a puzzle in motion, it's a mirror that reflects our hunger for order and our terror at encountering something that exceeds it. Maybe that's why its shape won't hold still, not because it is hiding from us, but because it is shaped by us, by how we look, when we look, with what questions in our hearts. There's an old saying in physics, observation changes the observed. What if that's not just a quantum truth, but a cosmic one? What if 3I Atlas is responding to the way we look at it? What if, like an ancient oracle, it offers one shape to the curious, another to the skeptical, and a third to those who dare to imagine more? It's not a comet. It's not a ship. It's not a rock. It's a question, and the shape it takes is your answer. You were told the sky was indifferent, that planets moved in silence, that comets came and went like visitors who never remembered your name. But 3I Atlas is not forgetting. It's aligning, and the target of that alignment is Mars. It's subtle at first, a simple line on a chart, the path of the object intersecting the orbital plane of Mars. Nothing unusual, until you realize it's the third time, 3 alignments, 3 chances, and each more precise than the last. The first happened far out before the object even crossed Jupiter's orbit. A long-range trajectory model showed that 3I Atlas would pass within visual scanning distance of Mars, nearly matching plane inclination to within 0.7 degrees. Close, but not close enough to trigger alarm. The second time, observers noticed something odd. The approach vector curved ever so slightly, shaving milliseconds off its predicted passage time. No known outgassing, no external perturbation, but the trajectory bent just enough to tighten the flyby window with Mars. Now the third approach is imminent. A new alignment window opens, and this time, it's not just visual, it's geometric. From the object's current course, it will cross a point in space that allows uninterrupted line of sight with both Earth and Mars for exactly 16 minutes. A three-body angle, a corridor. You've heard the term opposition before, when Mars and Earth line up on opposite sides of the sky. But this is something stranger. A moment where 3I Atlas forms the apex of a triangle between two inhabited worlds. Why does that matter? Because it allows one object to observe or connect both simultaneously. A passive transceiver, a listening post, or worse, a messenger. It's easy to call this conjecture, easy to say we're reading too much into alignments. But orbital dynamics are not poetry. They don't bend for drama. They only align like this when something wants them to. And ancient records tell us this pattern is not new. In 1892, an astronomer named Edward Emerson Barnard recorded a transient streak, passing near Mars during an observational run. The path was dismissed as a photographic defect, but his notes mention an odd persistence in geometry. That same year, Mars and Earth were in near-perfect opposition. Now go further back. In 1604, Johannes Kepler observed a bright nova in Ophiuchus. Nearby, in Mars's orbital corridor, he noted an unknown intruder, a brief flash, logged only once. No comet, no asteroid, just a flash. Patterns always start as accidents, until they stack, and now they've stacked too high to ignore. Because the third Martian alignment coincides not only with 3I Atlas's perihelion, but with a communication blackout window between NASA's relay satellites and surface missions on Mars. A blackout during the exact 16-minute alignment corridor. The reason? Solar interference. The explanation? Routine. The feeling? Wrong. Because when you look closer, the schedule for satellite handovers was changed 2 weeks ago, adjusted away from the corridor, almost as if someone didn't want signals crossing through that part of space. And here's the part that truly chills. Mars itself has gone quiet before. In 2003, during a routine imaging cycle, the Mars Global Surveyor temporarily lost orientation. Its onboard star tracker failed not from mechanical error, but from what was described as unexpected optical reflection. In a vacuum, in the shadow of the Sunday, what could reflect light toward an orbiting spacecraft in that environment? The report was buried. The mission ended the following year. But now, 20 years later, an object with strange reflectivity is threading through that same orbital corridor. It is not coincidence, it is choreography, and the choreography is ancient. The Sumerians wrote of Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, not as a world, but as an object that passes through the heavens, along paths the gods alone could track. Mayan codices describe the messenger stone, a thing that visits the red world when the sky's gate is open. And in Egyptian texts, Mars was her Desha, the red one whose alignments marked both chaos and connection. You don't need to take these stories literally. You only need to see that we've been watching this path longer than we remember. Because Mars is not just a neighbor, it is a node, a recorder, a mirror, and perhaps 3I Atlas is trying to speak to it, or through it. There's a reason NASA built orbital relays there, a reason Elon Musk dreams of colonies, a reason Mars lingers in every human future. It's the one place close enough to matter but far enough to be safe. Or so we thought, because if Atlas uses this alignment for transmission, or activation, or measurement, we'll be powerless to intercept it. Not because we lack the technology, but because we lack the access. For 16 minutes, the object will sit at the apex, watching, waiting, and maybe doing something else entirely, and we'll be on the other side, wondering not just what it is, but what it's talking to. You've looked at stars your whole life. You've seen their fixed patterns, the way constellations stay in place while planets wander among them. But what if one of those wanderers wasn't random? What if it was writing, not in letters, but in motion? 3. Atlas is moving in a way that suggests it's not just passing through space, it's mapping it, not with cameras, with its own trajectory. You've heard of Lagrange points, those delicate gravitational sweet spots where the pull of celestial bodies cancels out. Spacecraft linger there, debris accumulates, balance happens. But 3I Atlas doesn't settle into them. It flirts with them. It curves around them like a painter dragging a brush just wide of the canvas edge. In doing so, it traces something that should not exist, a glyph. Mathematicians call them epicycles, loops within loops. They appear in orbital simulations, but only when something is either under multiple controls or guided by intention. And when 3I Atlas is tracked across the solar system, its path describes something that does not resemble a natural arc, but a patterned flourish. It loops near Venus, coils inward toward Mercury's orbital line, then slings around the Sun, not with randomness, but symmetry. Plot its motion from above, and the object draws a wide spiral, then a narrow S-curve, then a soft triangle. And when you overlay that pattern with the Fibonacci spirals from its radiometric pulse data, they align. This is not a trajectory, it's a signature. One astrodynamicist, publishing anonymously after being removed from a research group, plotted the path and overlaid it against cultural symbols. The result? An astonishing resemblance to the Sri Yantra, an ancient geometric diagram used in Hindu and Buddhist meditation, symbolizing the intersection of the material and the cosmic. Another analyst found resonance with the flower of life, a recurring motif in sacred geometry. These aren't declarations of meaning, they're resonances, and resonance matters, because nature does not create sacred geometry by accident. It creates it when energy is being optimized, when systems are being tuned, when information is being preserved across change. So what does it mean that a comet is drawing a symbol in gravitational ink? It means we're not watching an object, we're watching an intent. The universe, when it behaves randomly, spreads entropy, disorder. But when you see order emerging crisp, layered, recursive order, you are no longer in the domain of accident. You're in the domain of expression. Think of a vinyl record. Its grooves look like chaos to the naked eye. But place a needle, and sound emerges. Now imagine a comet as the needle, space as the vinyl, the sun as the spinning motor. What song does Atlas play? We may already be hearing it. Several long-wave radio telescopes have reported low-bandwidth harmonics that spike only when Atlas is near planetary conjunctions. These aren't signals, not in the intentional sense. They're resonances, reactions, harmonics. One team described them as gravitational chords, interference patterns between solar flux, planetary fields, and the object's motion, and the melody is repeating. Like a motif, The object seems to generate familiar interference patterns at precise orbital intervals, a waveform in space, coiling and uncoiling through celestial relationships. Imagine this from above, a thread woven not through fabric, but through gravity, not to bind, but to resonate. Atlas is writing something we've only just begun to read, and there is precedence. The Voyager probes, long out in the heliopause, carry golden records inscribed with sound, math, and diagrams. They also carry one odd thing, a map, a pulsar map, showing Earth's location relative to 14 pulsars' cosmic lighthouses, whose signals can be triangulated. That map is how we told the galaxy where to find us. Now, what if someone or something has been doing the same thing, in reverse? Not with metal plaques, but with trajectories, with loops, with shape. 3. Atlas may not be coming to us. It may be pointing us towards something bigger, something older, because the arc it carves isn't just spatial, it's conceptual. In mathematics, spiral motion suggests iteration, feedback, growth, the way ideas evolve, the way galaxies form, the way your own DNA coils. Atlas, then, is not just navigating the solar system, it's echoing its design. The question, then, isn't, what is it doing? It's who was meant to follow it. Because a map is not made for the place it's drawn in, it's made for the one who reads it. And that's where this becomes personal. We didn't just detect Atlas, we interpreted it. We extracted signals. We spotted patterns. In doing so, we've already passed a kind of test, the test of attention, of curiosity, of pattern recognition. And just as ancient explorers followed stars across the sea, we are now tracing an object across space that may be pointing toward a horizon we haven't yet imagined. The shape of its path is not an accident, it is a revelation, and like any good map, it asks you one thing, not what are you looking at, but where are you willing to go? You tend to think of space as distance, kilometers, light years, the stretching black between stars. But time lives there, too nested in every orbit, coded in every echo, written in the light from things too far away to touch. And when 3I Atlas entered our solar system, it didn't just cross space, it crossed time. Because when astronomers first plotted its inbound trajectory and compared it to the known stellar background, they discovered something strange. The object was not coming from a random direction. It came from a region recently vacated by a dying star, Ti 583207101, a red giant that went quiet 90 years ago. What's strange is not that Atlas passed through that region. What's strange is the timing. If you calculate the object's velocity and backdate its course, the numbers suggest it passed close to the dying star, just as that star was reaching the final stage of collapse, just as it was preparing to shed its outer layers and fade from telescopic reach, as if 3I Atlas waited for the curtain to close before beginning its arc toward us. You may think that's coincidence, but space doesn't care about metaphor. It cares about vectors, and Atlas's vector changed just enough in that window to make the difference. It chose a path to us that became viable only after the star died. Now hold that in your mind for a moment, not because it proves anything, but because it implies something that timing matters. That now was the moment the path opened, and maybe that was always the plan. Because everything about Atlas feels tuned, not for chaos, for resonance. It arrives as Earth completes its 25th solar cycle since the launch of the first radio telescope. It pulses, just as we achieve real-time exoplanet detection. It enters the inner system as AI systems begin watching the skies without sleep. These are not coincidences. These are mirrors, because the object is behaving like something that expects to be watched, but only when the watchers are ready to decode, ready to reflect. It's a hard thing to describe, but easy to feel. The sense that you are no longer just seeing an object, you are being seen by it. This is where the idea of the time mirror begins to emerge. A hypothesis developed by a small team of theoretical physicists in Norway, that 3I Atlas is not simply a comet or a craft. It is a form of reflective trigger, a kind of galactic lighthouse that activates not on a schedule, but in response to the developmental milestones of an observing civilization. In their unpublished paper, one passage stands out. The object may encode a form of temporal acknowledgement, a loop in which its motion reflects our readiness to observe it, and our response becomes part of its function. Not transmission, but entanglement. Not quantum entanglement in the particle sense, conceptual entanglement. A signal whose activation depends on us recognizing ourselves in its structure. A time mirror. This isn't entirely unprecedented. The concept shows up in old myths and new math alike. The Dogon spoke of sky beings whose stars only appear when we are ready. In Tibetan cosmology, the Kalachakra, the wheel of time, describes a celestial mechanism that responds to human consciousness itself. Even modern science echoes the shape. Bell's theorem in quantum mechanics shows that observation collapses probabilities, that watching is an act of participation. So what happens when you look at the sky and it looks back? 3I Atlas may not be intelligent in the way we understand minds, but it behaves as though it knows when it is being seen. Its pulses shift, its emissions modulate, its timing grows tighter with every new data point we extract. One telescope catches its Fibonacci pulse, another picks up phase shifts in the terahertz spectrum, and then, almost as if in response, its light curve changes. Like a teacher adjusting the lesson once the student answers correctly. And this brings us to a final, disquieting idea. What if 3I Atlas is not the first? Not the first visitor, not the first messenger, but the first one we could understand. What if the galaxy has been seeded not with messages, but with mirrors objects that only reveal their purpose when a species reaches a certain level of cognitive resonance? Not a beacon for whoever is out there, but a test for whoever is here. You're not just seeing a strange object move through space. You're watching yourself, reflected in trajectory and timing, and the soft hum of decoded patterns. This isn't a comet, it's a clock, and it just struck the hour. You've imagined first contact 1,000 ways. A transmission, a ship, a being, something loud enough to rewrite history in a single moment. But what if it's quieter than that? What if contact doesn't begin with sound, but with symmetry? Because that's what 3I Atlas keeps offering. Not declarations, not answers, but echoes. It doesn't beam signals toward Earth. It mirrors us. Look closely at its path, and you'll find it carves arcs that echo the orbits of our own spacecraft. It bends around Venus like the Magellan probe. It slings past Earth in a rhythm that recalls Galileo's gravity assists. It passes through zones of space that match Voyager's exit trajectory, Cassini's insertion angle, and even Rosetta's comet-chasing dance. Coincidence? Or choreography? The object is moving as though it has studied us, not in the way of spies or invaders, but in the way of archivists, of mathematicians, of engineers who understand the value of alignment. One aerospace systems analyst ran simulations overlaying Atlas's arc with every major probe launched since 1977. The overlap was uncanny, not identical, but resonant. If this is a coincidence, it is a layered one. The object is not matching our course. It is answering it, and that kind of symmetry matters. Symmetry is the language of nature, of crystals and snowflakes, of galaxies and DNA, but it's also the language of intelligence, of signal processing, of code. Symmetry is what you build when you want your message to last. Think of the Voyager golden record, etched with music and math, but also with symmetry drawings of hydrogen atoms, a map made of pulsars, the binary rhythm of logic gates. Now, flip the perspective. What if someone else sent a message, not on a disk, but on a trajectory, not in code, but in behavior? What if 3I Atlas is what it looks like when a species long gone or long evolved tries to say, "We see you," without ever speaking? The symmetry goes deeper. Atlas emits pulses in golden ratio intervals. It rotates at speeds that produce perfect frequency, doublings, octaves, in physics. Its emission profile forms spectrograms that loop back on themselves, like chorales in a cathedral. This is contact without sound, recognition without language, and it would make sense. If you were trying to send a message across time, not just space, you wouldn't use language. You wouldn't even use symbols. You'd use structure. Structure lasts. And symmetry is structure in its purest form. It's why crystals grow the way they do, why atoms bond the way they do, why minds, whether carbon-based or not, recognize balance. That's why 3I Atlas feels less like a comet and more like a sculpture, a kinetic artwork built to rotate through time, casting reflections we can only see when we reach the right vantage point. One physicist wrote, "We may be looking at a form of semiotic satellite, a vessel whose message is not in transmission, but in its mere existence. Not a signal you hear, a signal you realize." That is the cosmic perspective, understanding that the universe may already be talking to us, not in our time, but in its own. Atlas may have been launched before our species had language, before our sun had planets, or it may have emerged spontaneously, not crafted by intelligence, but as intelligence, a naturally occurring AI, born not of silicon, but of stars. And that's where the human mirror emerges, because we are doing the same thing. We build probes, we launch archives, we etch platinum with diagrams, and spin gold with music. We broadcast our story in geometry and math, hoping someone will someday reach our corner of the sky and understand that we, too, tried to be known. So maybe Atlas is not a message to us. Maybe it's a message from us, from a future we haven't reached yet. A civilization that endured long enough to send its memory backward through time, encoded in mass and motion. This is not science fiction. This is space-time. In general relativity, the curvature of space allows for closed time-like curves, theoretical paths that loop. If a machine could surf such a curve, it would arrive not from the stars, but from us. Not a comet, a recursion. And that brings us to a final possibility, the one that echoes deepest. What if 3I Atlas is not a visitor, What if it's a seed, a thing left behind to grow only when the climate, cognitive, cultural, technological, was fertile enough to nourish it? It doesn't land. It doesn't broadcast. It waits. And now we've reached the point of bloom. That would explain the symmetry, the resonance, the mirror, because that's what seeds do. They wait. And when the season is right, they answer. By now, you understand that 3i Atlas isn't just moving through space. It's moving through meaning, through interpretation, through memory, not yours or mine, but the universe's. Because when an object behaves like this with such intentional curves, such rhythm, such encoded stillness, it ceases to be merely physical. It becomes mnemonic, a device for remembering. Memory, in its oldest form, is spatial. Before writing, before recording, we remembered by placing ideas in architecture, temples, labyrinths, rings of stone aligned to solstices. That's what 3i Atlas resembles now. Not a comet, not a craft, but a monument. One that moves, one that mirrors, one that recalls. You remember how its path intersects old spacecraft orbits, how its emissions echo Fibonacci, how its brightness pulses like breath. But there's more. The object's trajectory, when charted from three-dimensional space into polar coordinates, traces a path that resembles the rosette pattern, a symbol found in nature, in sacred design, in neural architectures, but most tellingly in memory palaces. Yes, in ancient Greece, orators would build imaginary palaces in their minds. Each room held a thought, each object a phrase. To recall their speeches, they would mentally walk through these rooms. Now imagine doing that with planets, with orbits, with gravity wells. 3i Atlas is walking a palace built from stars, and we are the guests entering it for the first time. It doesn't just move from point to point, it dwells at perihelion, at Martian corridor alignments, at gravity-neutral zones where Lagrange points bloom like invisible flowers, each one a chamber, a glyph, a message only visible from a position of understanding. And now we have that understanding. The human species has reached the technological maturity to perceive celestial motion, not merely as mechanics, but as information architecture. One astrophysicist, working in private after her university cut funding for non-conventional orbital theory, released a paper under a pseudonym. She called Atlas a mnemonic machine. Her thesis was startlingly simple. This object is not remembering us. It is reminding us. Reminding us of what? Of old paths, of previous cycles, of shapes we've seen in dreams and diagrams. Because it's not just modern eyes watching Atlas. Ancient stories watched it too. In the Zoroastrian Bundahishan, there's mention of a silent star that only speaks when the watchers are aligned. The Aboriginal Yolngu people speak of a light serpent that curves through the sky, appearing every third generation. In Norse myth, the Fimbulvetr, the great winter before rebirth, begins when a long light crosses the sky, too slow to be a meteor, too precise to be a star. Are these stories metaphor? Absolutely. But metaphor is memory's poetry, and sometimes the truth is easier to keep when it's sung. So here we are, watching an object trace curves through space that match our own collective subconscious. And that means something, because memory is not passive, it is generative. It doesn't just store, it shapes. It builds new insight by recalling old connections. So what kind of intelligence leaves behind a moving memory? A device designed not to instruct, but to evoke. Not a teacher, not a messenger, but an anamnesis engine. A thing whose presence pulls forgotten truths from the back of our collective mind. Like déjà vu written in orbit. You feel it, don't you? The tug, the sense that this object has been here before, not in space, but in thought. As if it is not a new arrival, but an ancient friend, a geometry remembered, a mirror remet. And in this, you see the deeper possibility. That 3i Atlas is not from another civilization, but from an earlier version of our own. Not us, exactly, but a path like ours, a branch we never took, a civilization that once mapped its memory into matter, that launched questions instead of answers, because they knew answers fade, but questions endure, and nothing asks a question louder than a mystery that moves. Maybe they saw their end coming. Maybe they understood entropy too well, so they built something that wouldn't resist it, but would ride it. A comet-shaped reminder, a drifting archive not of facts, but of forms. And now, it's here, curving through our night sky, stirring old myths, sparking quiet awakenings in the hearts of engineers, children, dreamers, people who wake in the middle of the night not knowing why, and find themselves staring up and wondering. That is the geometry of memory, not a straight line, not even a circle, but a spiral. One that loops through time, through civilizations, through stories. And if you're listening to this now, it means you're part of the loop. You're remembering something you never knew, you forgot. There's something quiet following 3i Atlas, not a tale, not a signal, not even a shadow, just a feeling, the kind that hums at the base of your spine when you look at something ancient and know without knowing how that it matters. You've felt it before, staring into cave paintings, not sure what the shapes mean, but certain they meant everything once. Walking through old ruins with your hand on the stones, feeling the echo of lives that aren't yours. Now imagine that same feeling, but coming from the sky. That's what 3i Atlas has become, a mystery big enough to bend emotion, to awaken something too deep to articulate, a kind of cosmic nostalgia for something you've never actually known. You think this is about science, but it's more personal than that, because the more we learn about Atlas, the more it reveals about us, not our technology, our temperament, our readiness. The object isn't just showing patterns, it's provoking them in us. People who never cared about astronomy are now looking up at star maps, learning orbital mechanics, deciphering radio plots, children drawing spirals they can't explain, elderly listeners saying they've seen this in dreams. That's not science, that's resonance, a kind of emotional interference pattern between the sky and the species watching it, and we don't know what to call it. We try words like comet, probe, artifact, but none of them fit, because those words belong to objects. An atlas is behaving more like an invitation to feel something you didn't know was missing, a connection, not to aliens, but to the possibility that the universe is not silent, that it is waiting. And suddenly, we're listening not just with telescopes, but with imagination, with memory, with longing, a longing that isn't about danger or answers, but about belonging. Because the truth is, we've never really known where we are. Our planet floats in a black sea, circling a yellow star, tucked in a galactic suburb. Every map we've made is missing scale. Every chart is an approximation. But 3i Atlas doesn't bring us fear. It brings us orientation. It says, "You are here. You have arrived at the part of the story where recognition becomes possible." And that recognition doesn't need to be full. It only needs to begin. That's how awakening always starts, not with information, but with awareness. And awareness is spreading all over the world. People are asking the same strange question in different ways. Why does it feel like something's about to happen? Not catastrophe, not apocalypse, just change, a shift, and not in the sky, in us. We're standing on the edge of something we can't name yet, and Atlas is the shape of that edge. It's not here to explain, it's here to reflect, and reflection is the most dangerous force in the universe. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can't go back. You can't unsee the spiral. You can't unhear the pulse. You can't unknow the symmetry. The human mind, when it encounters something that doesn't fit, does something incredible. It grows. It makes space for the unknown. It stretches around it like new muscle. That's what this moment is. A stretch. Not to believe in aliens, but to believe in possibilities. To ask, what else could this be? Who else could we become? And that's what makes 3i Atlas so important, not because of what it is, but because of how it changes us. It makes us curious again, and curiosity is the most human thing we have. We used it to leave the trees, to cross oceans, to crack atoms. Now we're using it to interpret silence, not as emptiness, but as a kind of speech, a kind that doesn't speak in grammar or sound, but in patterns, in shapes, in timing, and deep down, you already understand the language. It's the same one that lives in your heartbeat, your breath, your walk. It's the rhythm you follow when you trust your gut. And that's why this isn't about evidence anymore. It's about readiness. You're not being asked to believe. You're being asked to notice, to pay attention to that small ache that wakes you at 4 in the morning and draws your eyes to the stars, to the quiet intuition that maybe we're not alone and never were, to the feeling you can't name, the one that arrives not with explanation, but with recognition. That's how contact really begins. Not with a flash in the sky, but with a whisper in the soul. And 3i Atlas is that whisper, finally taking shape. There's a strange twist in the spiral of realization. A moment when you stop asking what the object is and start asking why it feels so familiar. Because if 3i Atlas had been found orbiting a distant star, or tumbling near a gas giant light years away, we might have marveled from afar. But it came here, to us, and it's not just that it behaves strangely, it's that it behaves in ways we understand. The Fibonacci timing, the elegant arcs through gravity wells, the silent pulsing rhythm, the graceful deceleration into observational corridors. Not alien behavior, just highly considered. One scientist, a deep space systems engineer, writing anonymously, said it plainly. If I were designing a probe to last 10 million years and announce itself to intelligent life, this is exactly what it would do. And that's the thing. We would have built this. If given the time, if given the fear, if given the hope, we would have cloaked it in harmlessness, made it look like ice, dust, an ancient traveler. We would have given it multiple layers of camouflage, chemical, optical, orbital. We would have wrapped our message in myth. We'd have made sure it didn't scream, that it hummed, whispered, waited, and we'd have built it to arrive just late enough to not be mistaken for a random rock, but just early enough to still be caught. That's what 3i Atlas feels like now. Not foreign, but inevitable, as if some version of us older, braver, wiser already lived through something we haven't yet, something that required remembrance. You've heard it said that history repeats, that evolution spirals, not climbs. So maybe this object isn't from another world. Maybe it's from another loop, a prior spin of human civilization, or something close enough to count. Not time travel, not reincarnation, just recursion. We don't like to think about how much time has passed since the birth of the stars, or how many cycles could have come and gone before we got here. But if a civilization rose millions of years ago here or elsewhere, and reached the point we're just beginning to approach now, what would they leave behind? Not monuments. They crumble. Not digital records. They corrupt. They'd leave motion. They'd leave orbits. Mass. Mirrors. They'd leave questions shaped like objects. Because those endure, and that's what Atlas is. The shape of a question we haven't been brave enough to ask. And now, perhaps, the shape of our own answer. Because whether it's alien or ancestral, or some tangled hybrid of both, it shows us something we didn't expect to see. Ourselves, our thinking, our caution, our love of elegance over brute force, our instinct to wrap truth in stories, so it survives longer than we do. That's why it's so hard to dismiss Atlas as just a comet. It behaves like intention, and maybe, in the end, that's the defining feature of intelligent life, not language or tools or cities, but the act of leaving something behind, intentionally, something that asks to be understood only when the species looking at it is ready to look back. That readiness is now, not just scientific readiness, but emotional readiness. We are now a species that dreams of Mars, that names telescopes after poets, that turns radio noise into symphonies, that spends its nights not in fear of the dark, but in awe of it. We are ready to see ourselves in the other, even when the other is an object made of light and spin and distance. That's what makes this moment so profound. It's not about what 3i Atlas is. It's about who we are, now that we've seen it. Because whether or not we're alone has always been the wrong question. The better question is, what will we become now that we've seen something we would have built ourselves? Something that teaches not by instruction, but by reflection. Something that acts like memory wrapped in orbit. Something that feels, in our quietest hours, like it's calling us home. We've been trained to expect the extraordinary to announce itself loudly. Sirens, beacons, breakthroughs with press conferences. But what if the most powerful message doesn't come with attribution? What if it doesn't need a name, or a face, or even a voice? What if the message is the experience of recognizing it? That's what 3i Atlas seems to be. Not a broadcast, but a realization. Not a signal sent to us, but one unlocked within us. It's easy to miss how strange that is, because every time we look closer, the object doesn't just reveal itself, it reveals us. Our thresholds, our biases, our patterns of explanation. First, we called it a comet, then an interstellar visitor, then an anomalous mass, then a possible artifact. And now, with each day, that category dissolves. Not because we're closer to the truth, but because the truth refuses to stay put. Just like Atlas itself, still emitting, still on trajectory, still doing something we cannot predict and yet feel. That's the haunting part. The feeling, that this object doesn't need to be interpreted. It needs to be felt, and that's a hard thing to explain in science. We're not supposed to talk about intuition in laboratories, but every scientist knows the best discoveries start with a hunch, a sense that something doesn't fit. Atlas is the embodiment of that sensation, stretched across millions of kilometers. It fits and doesn't fit, behaves and misbehaves, cooperates with gravity but not with chemistry, emits like a machine but refracts like a dust cloud. It is the contradiction that refuses to resolve, and in that contradiction, it becomes clear. This is not a message from someone, it's a message about something, about timing, about readiness, about recognition. And if there is no clear sender, then the meaning is shared, emergent. It's not the content that matters, it's the context. We saw Atlas not because it appeared, but because we became the kind of species that could perceive it as strange. And now, we're different. Because once you suspect you're being shown something, truly shown, you can't go back to sleep. You begin to look differently at the sky, not for light, but for language. And you start asking different questions. Not, what is it? But why now? Why does this object appear in the middle of our chaos? When the world's attention is split, and trust is low, and futures feel thin. Maybe that's the point, because a message like this doesn't just announce new knowledge. It consolidates memory. It says, you've come far. You know enough to understand patterns. You've built machines that mimic thought. You've turned your sky into data, your atoms into instruments, your curiosity into fuel. Now here's the next thing. Not bigger, not louder, but more resonant. A reflection of who you are, and who you've been, and who you might still become. It's no coincidence that Atlas behaves like the vessels we fantasize about. Silent, efficient, recursive, built to endure, not impress. It's not trying to land. It's not trying to speak. It's modeling, demonstrating how a message can exist without senders, how meaning can travel without interpretation. Like music played into an empty room, trusting someone will one day walk in and recognize the key. That's us, walking into the chamber, hearing the hum, and realizing it's in tune with something inside us we didn't know was listening. So maybe the sender doesn't matter. Maybe there is no sender. Maybe this is what the universe does when it gets complicated enough to reflect. It echoes, not with words, but with objects, not with statements, but with questions that glow. That's what Atlas is now, a glowing question, curving toward us, passing by, requiring nothing, and offering everything, because it changes how we define life, not as metabolism or replication or even intelligence, but as meaningful pattern recognition across time. And by that definition, Atlas is alive, or at least alivening. It's waking us up, not from sleep, from certainty, from the idea that messages must be directed, interpretable, and signed. They don't. Some messages just arrive, and when they do, we know. We don't know how we know, but we do. And that is the quiet miracle of now, that we've seen a thing, felt a thing, been changed by a thing, without needing anyone to tell us what it means. You remember moments of global awe, the first moon landing, the pale blue dot, the first blurry image of a black hole's shadow, when humanity paused, collectively, to look at itself through the lens of the cosmos. But this time, it's quieter. There are no presidents giving speeches, No countdowns broadcast across every screen. No mission patches or triumphant soundtracks. And yet, something just as profound is happening. It's in the quiet posts on amateur forums, the stilled breath of backyard astronomers, the schoolteacher drawing spirals on a chalkboard in a classroom no one filmed. This awakening isn't being televised. It's happening inside people, individually, gradually, deeply, and that's what makes it powerful. Because 3i Atlas didn't come to change headlines. It came to change attention. The shift is subtle, but unmistakable. Conversations about orbits and harmonics happening in cafes. Kids asking about Lagrange points. Artists painting what they can't quite explain. You see it in the way the question is spreading. Have you heard about that comet that's not really a comet? And then the pause, the look, the recognition. Something's happening, but no one's calling it official. No government has claimed discovery. No agency has called a press conference, because to do so would mean admitting that something might not be explainable, that something might be other. And that's the great fear of institutions not being wrong, but being incomplete. So the silence continues, but the silence is porous, and through it, people are connecting dots, not just between data points, but between feelings. They're noticing that 3i Atlas behaves like a presence, not sentient, maybe, but structured, built around a concept, not just an object, a concept of arrival, of timing, of shared realization. That's why it feels mythic, not because it's ancient, but because it's archetypal. It behaves the way our oldest stories say revelation arrives, not when the world is ready, but when it's fractured, distracted, needing cohesion. There's a reason every civilization tells tales of strange visitors during dark times, not to save us, but to wake us, not all at once, but seed by seed. And that's what's happening now. An awakening seeded not through declaration, but through resonance. You don't need to believe in aliens to feel it. You just need to notice how your thoughts have changed, how your sense of time has shifted, how you now look at the sky a little longer than you did before, not for answers, but for presence. That's the beginning of cosmic awareness, not the idea that someone is out there, but the realization that we're in here, that we've been standing at the shore of a vast ocean, naming waves, without ever asking where the tide wants to take us. 3i Atlas is not the tide, it's the ripple that finally caught our eye. And once you see the ripple, you begin to question the ocean. You begin to wonder how much you've missed and how much is still coming. Some are calling it disclosure, others disinformation. But maybe it's neither. Maybe it's not about secrets being kept. Maybe it's about understandings unfolding at the speed we can handle, which is never as fast as we want, but always faster than we're comfortable with. Because what's most unnerving about Atlas isn't its behavior, it's how much we recognize in it. The spiral, the symmetry, the soft refusal to fit. We've spent generations trying to find a message in the stars, and now, here is one. But it didn't come as light years of radio chatter. It came as an object behaving like a question. And suddenly, it's not just astronomers watching. It's musicians, poets, programmers, children, all staring at the same piece of sky and feeling something shift. Something internal, not panic, not belief, just curiosity, lit with a quiet flame. That's what an awakening looks like when it's honest. It doesn't roar, it spreads, And if you're feeling it, if you've made it this far, then you're part of it. You weren't asked. You were nudged. And maybe that's how we were always meant to find our way forward. Not through conquest. Not through conquest. Not even through contact. But through recognition, one by one. Until the mirror becomes a movement. It never spoke. Not once. Through all the observations, the alignments, the pulses, the reflections, 3i Atlas never sent a message in the way we expected. No burst of language, no binary signal, no sudden frequency shift that declared, "We are here." And that silence may be the most meaningful part of all, because in every contact scenario we've ever imagined, we've placed ourselves at the center, the ones to discover, the ones to decode, the ones to receive. But what if the message was never meant to be received? What if it was only ever meant to be noticed? That changes everything, because it suggests a universe not of calls and responses, but of quiet markers, signposts, sculptures drifting across time and gravity, left not to teach, but to indicate that someone else passed this way, that they too were watching, that they too felt wonder. You see, silence is not absence, not always. Sometimes, silence is precision, the restraint to let something be seen without being explained, like a painter who chooses negative space, a poet who ends the verse on an unfinished line. That is what Atlas has done. It showed up, behaved in a way that defied every box we tried to put it in, then continued onward, slow and steady, as if our confusion was expected. And maybe it was, because this object doesn't seem surprised by us. It seems ready for us, not waiting, not watching, just calibrated, as if part of a larger choreography, far beyond our scale of planning. There's something deeply humbling in that the most important thing to ever enter our solar system might not even be aimed at us, might just be passing through, doing its quiet work, reminding the stars that intelligence was once here and might be again. We tend to think of first contact as mutual, but maybe that's not how it works. Maybe it begins with asymmetry, with noticing something that doesn't fit, but also doesn't ask to. An object that drifts through the center of our system, behaving like a question we cannot answer and doesn't require one. What if that's the highest form of communication? To say nothing and yet change everything. It makes you think. What else have we missed? What other silences were speaking? And how would we even know? Because this moment is rare, not just because of what we're seeing, but because we're seeing it together. Not as a mission, but as a species. An engineer in France quietly updating trajectory models on her own time. A kid in Sao Paulo sketching spirals in a notebook. A retired physicist in Nairobi writing equations he thought he'd forgotten. People who have never met, never coordinated, but who all feel something. That something is the message, and maybe that's why Atlas never speaks, because the answer isn't in the object. It's in the network of recognition it awakens. That's the signal, not pulses, not primes. Us, noticing together, not believing the same thing, but sensing the same strangeness and choosing not to look away. That, perhaps, is the point, not proof. Participation, because meaning doesn't always arrive in language. Sometimes it arrives in the way your perspective shifts without permission, the way silence rearranges the furniture of your mind. That's what Atlas has done. It has walked quietly through the living room of civilization, rearranged a few chairs, and left. And now we're all standing here, wondering why things feel different. The sky hasn't changed, but we have. We've seen a shape move through it that refuses all old labels, and we're not afraid. We're awake. That's what makes this moment sacred. Not because of what we know, but because of how we're changing in response to what we can't. The real contact, it seems, isn't between us and them. It's between the present version of us and the next. The version that's just now learning how to listen, to silence, to shape, to awe, and to the one thing this object never did. It never shouted, never imposed, never demanded belief. It simply was, and in being, it taught, without words, without terms, without origin. It passed through like a parable, quietly changing every eye that looked up with an open mind. There are questions that have no answers, not because the truth isn't out there, but because the truth requires a perspective we haven't earned yet. 3i Atlas is one of those questions. It came and went without ceremony. No crash, no broadcast, no final maneuver. Just that slow, elegant glide past the inner planets, its golden spiral fading against the cold geometry of interstellar space. You probably won't hear about it again. The news cycle will move on. The telescopes will retarget. The public attention will dim like the object itself. But the mark it leaves will stay, because the real story of 3i Atlas was never in its composition. It was in the conversation it started without speaking. You saw scientists contradicting each other with unusual restraint. You saw children drawing new shapes, asking old questions. You saw a species fragmented, distracted, and overwhelmed pause for half a breath to wonder. That breath mattered. We may never know what 3i Atlas was, whether it was built or born, sent or seeded, whether it was the last of its kind or the first of something new. We may never know if it noticed us noticing it, or if that was the point all along. And yet, it leaves behind something undeniable, a new kind of stillness, not ignorance, not confusion, but reverent uncertainty, an appreciation for the things that refuse to explain themselves. And in that space, you grow, because science isn't about having all the answers. It's about standing before the unknown with curiosity louder than fear. That's what 3i Atlas gave us. Not a revelation, a relationship between the known and the unknowable, between what we measure and what we feel. It invited us not to believe, but to wonder better, to sit with the unprovable, to remain calm in the face of infinite context. And that's where we'll leave it. Not with conclusions, but with coordinates. Not with endings, but with echoes. Not with closure, but with that quietest of gifts, the question that lingers. So wherever you are tonight, on a rooftop, in a quiet bedroom, beneath the soft hum of streetlights or stars, know this: you are living in the chapter that noticed. You are part of the species that turned its face to the sky and saw something strange and didn't look away. That is enough. Leave a comment telling me what time it is and where in the world you're listening from. And if you feel something soft, unresolved, and just out of reach, that's not confusion. That's awe. Let it stay with you. Let it carry you into sleep.